Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, Canadian Missing Project copyrighted edition for our video channel. Thanks for being here. This is a missing persons edition. And yes, we're going to have some interesting cases today, have some interesting letters, and some background on a major part of the missing 411 phenomena. So, thank you for being here. The week has been fun up here in northern Montana. Got some clear weather and temps are in the low 30s, or high 30s, low 40s. It's been very nice. And been getting out a little bit, having some fun. So we're going to talk today about some cases that are related to missing 411, a sobering coincidence. And we are heading into spring. It's important for you to get your backpack out, get your safety devices ready, and be out there on the trail, because that's where the fun starts. So we've got some pretty good letters for you this week. First one, hey Dave, longtime fan. I bought your first box set when it was just 3 books. I've been an avid follower ever since. The incident I'm going to talk to you about happened in 2004. I live in rural West Virginia. When I was 17, I'd spent all day riding my ATV with a friend. From my home, I could take back roads to my friend's home, and these roads were nothing more than a one-lane rutted four-wheeler path across ridge tops at the time. Sounds like fun. One night I was driving home at about 11:30. I had heavy woods uphill to my right and the same downhill to my left. It was an overcast night, sporadic moonlit shining through. I came to a part in the path where some briars hung out over and across my lane of travel. Something in my mind told me to slow down or stop. When I got closer to this spot, I heard a large branch crack just uphill to my right. But it was behind basically a wall of foliage. I thought it was a deer. When I got to the middle of the briars, some of them caught on my jacket and caused me to suddenly let off the accelerator. As I was in second gear, this caused my ATV to lurch to a stop. The rest is sort of a blur. A jack of adrenaline and fear of likes of which I have never felt before. As I settled back into my seat from the sudden lurching stop, a rock the size of a basketball flew in front of my face about 6 inches away. I was sitting several feet off the ground. The force of it passing moved my hair, and I was so close I could smell the earth of the soil on it. It came straight out of the bush at my head, height, almost like a chest pass. No way it bounced. My only conclusion is that it was thrown. But what could throw a rock the size of a size of a basketball? Not me. Before I could even process this, I heard a short, sharp growl emanate from the foliage almost directly beside me. It was so deep it vibrated my rib cage more than the idling of the ATV. Almost subconsciously, I floored the ATV away. I got approximately a quarter to half mile from the spot, and my vehicle just sputtered out. I was out of fuel from the main tank. This was not unusual. I'd ridden all day. I sat there in the silence, catching my breath and trying to compose myself. And the headlights were in front of me, my red brake lights behind me, and I flipped the selector to my reserve tank. My hands were shaking, so this was hard. I then heard what I could only describe as a bulldozer crashing through the woods on the opposite side of the trail that the rock had come in from. I threw up, not ashamed to admit it. I felt seized with fear. I barely was able to crank the choke enough on the ATV. I flew home way faster than I'd ever driven before. I remember crying the whole way home. Maybe it was adrenaline. I told my friends the story and they didn't believe me, so we went back out a few days later during the broad daylight. The rock still sat on the side of the trail where it had fallen. We tried to pick it up and throw it like we had seen it come at me. We could pick it up and pathetically throw it a bit, but nothing at the speed that I saw that night. That rock sat on the side of the road until the path was eventually widened due to oil and gas traffic in the area. I have no doubt that rock had connected, I would have been disappeared. Definitely dead. The stories are pretty normal. I had a story one time told to me by some people that were riding on horseback, kind of southeast of Crater Lake in Oregon. They were riding next to deep foliage, and they were riding one right behind another, and there were four in a line, and the third person in line is riding along, and the person behind him is watching, and they see a huge hairy hand come out of the foliage and push the person off their horse. The unusual thing was the horse didn't react. So this person picks himself up. The person behind saw what happened, pulls back on their horse, rides all the way around the outside and meets them when they come out and tells his friend what he saw. Freaked him out. Everybody was okay, but that's definitely a freaky scene. A couple of things that I need to remind everybody of. In April, I'm going to be at the Ocala, O-C-A-L-A, Ocala, Florida Bigfoot Conference. It's going to be huge, folks. Huge. You need to be there. It'll be a really good time. Ocala, Florida, I'll be there for one day. I think it's a Saturday. And Angie will be there. We'll have some books with us. So hopefully I'll see you there. And then if you Google Alaska Bigfoot Cruise, that's in September. I've just been told that there's only a few rooms left. They've sold them out. So that's pretty darn good for the first annual Alaska Bigfoot Cruise. It'll be a good time. Just Google Alaska Bigfoot Cruise. You'll find it. Next letter. Hey Dave, I hope this email finds you well. I've had a keen interest in subjects with a mysterious nature for the majority of my life, and I've had particular interest in your area for as long as I can remember. I commend you for bringing the stories of the missing to the attention of the masses in the honest and professional way you do. My reason for writing is to tell you my story about an orb. The story will feature in a book that I'm writing, but I wanted to share it with you first, so I'll keep the details of the book to myself. Firstly, it's important to explain a little about myself. I'm a former professional outdoor person and wildlife guide. Observation was a key part of my scientific studies and surveys. I'm not prone to flights of fancy. I question everything. 99% of the time I can explain anything out of the ordinary that I encounter. There are only a few occasions where I've genuinely been left scratching my head, and this is one of them. Most orbs I encounter personally or see from others are particles of dust reflecting off the flash of a camera. This was not the case here. It took place in England, in the county of Essex to be exact. The date was October 24th, 2017, and I clearly remember the date as it was my mom's birthday and she was visiting my home, as earlier in the year she lost her partner of nearly 40 years and was living alone. One of the gifts that I gave my mom was a high-powered flashlight. It was beginning to get dark, but the moody gray sky still had enough light to see quite well. We were standing outside in the garden and I was showing my mom how the beam functions with the flashlight. I randomly pointed the light to the sky, and as it turned on, it illuminated a tennis ball-sized orb that was flying between 20 and 30 feet off the ground. I can categorically say that it wasn't a particle or dust, nor was it an insect or something randomly blowing in the wind. It was flying intelligently and was completely invisible until I lit it up. We both witnessed the orb and watched it fly away as I trailed it with the beam of light. It was slightly windy outside, but the orb didn't seem to be affected by this. It was as if it was alive or being controlled by something. To describe the orb, it was tennis ball size, perfectly spherical, and almost appeared as semi-transparent ball of smoke. It was flying with purpose, like it had to go somewhere. The only phenomena that I suppose it could have been is a form of ball lightning, as the weather was a little stormy, but this is incredibly rare, and I'd image a ball lightning to be more foreboding. The small orb seemed delicate and rather peaceful. I'm so very sorry about the loss of your son, Ben. No parent should have gone through this. But I firmly believe there's far more to our existence than we can or will ever understand. And that our loved ones are much closer than we know. Till it's our time to join them where they are, of course, I'm heartened to see that Huck has brought some light and magic to your life. Thank you for keeping me company for countless hours as I illustrate books, my other job. Best wishes to you and Angie and Huck. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. Appreciate the kind words about Ben. Ben's obviously somebody I think about all the time. He's a big part of who I bounced my ideas off of. Bigfoot, UFOs, it didn't matter. A lot of people get tired about talking about these subjects, and I understand. And I try not to bring it up to a lot of people because they don't even want to hear about it. Ben was one of those people that I could talk to about things anytime. And he knew, of course, that if he ever called me, I'd pick up and we'd talk incessantly for hours about this kind of stuff. And he was a big reader. I don't know anybody that read more than Ben. And he would pick up things that we'd discuss. He knew a lot about the Bhagavad Gita and the various things associated with it. So I learned a lot. And when I can learn a lot from talking to somebody, it's a big deal. Next letter. Hey Dave, I first want to thank you for everything you do to keep us and the village well informed. Last August, my cousin and I went for a bike ride on the D&L Rail Trail. We rode from Whitehaven to Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. The trail goes along the Lehigh River and through the Lehigh Gorge. It's all wooded with very steep sides. It's in the Pocono Mountains in eastern Pennsylvania. Sounds gorgeous. Now, what happened? We'd stopped for lunch when everything went very quiet. I know what that means, so I got up and started to look around. At the same time, we heard what sounded like electrical crackling. Both of us were on our feet when we saw, coming down the steep mountainside, two bright orange-white orbs. These things were moving fast and dodging around trees and rocks. They were coming straight at us. They slowed as we crossed the trail about 10 feet in front of us. They were about the size of a basketball. They were white with striking orange light coming from the inside and still making the crackling sound. They then moved down the hill and across the river below us. We lost sight of them in the woods on the other side. They appeared to be under some kind of control because they never came close to hitting any trees or rocks. Once they were gone, the forest returned to normal. I don't know if it's related, but we both came down with very bad headaches on the drive home. Thanks for listening. I think all your information given to these topics is important. Headaches. Let me mention this. I've known several people that have had very close encounters with Bigfoot and have talked about extremely bad headaches in the hours preceding the sighting. So bad so that it debilitated them. So headaches associated with orbs, I tend to believe, and to me it gives some credibility to the incident. And I wish I understand what that was about, because I don't. Is it a message somehow to stay away, or is it just a side effect of the energy that they're producing? I don't know. Hey Dave, I just wanted to email you and share a few things. Each year I've been going to Honobia is Honobia, Oklahoma, and spending time camping. Well, I've been to Honobia a few times. Harvey and I have been there and talked at their Bigfoot conference. It is in the middle of nowhere. Really nowhere. And the amount of people that come out there for the conference is amazing. So, first year, November 2021, a buddy and I camped at the top of one of the mountains. Around 9 p.m., we had a fox walk within a few feet of us, constantly watching behind it. There was a fire made, and we were staring at the firelight. All of a sudden, we heard some huge footsteps coming through the forest close to where we were. The fox instantly laid down and stared in the direction. We closed our mouths and opened our ears to the max, probably 10 minutes of total silence. I had my Glock 23 with a weapon light on it, and my buddy at that point had a SIG P320 with a light. We were trained on the fox because of the bold nature at first. The fox decided it had enough and walked straight by the fire and disappeared in the woods. Total silence still. We sat a few more minutes and decided to grab some bigger weapons. I had a Mossberg 590 with a light, and my buddy had an M1 Garand with a light. We snuck, no lights on, into this big opening from where we were seated. I whispered to him that on 3 we would turn on the lights and attempt to see what scared the fox off. On a whispered count of 3, we hit the lights. The woods erupted into commotion, and there was 2 somethings. One immediately to the left in the wood line, and one maybe 40 years ahead in the wood line. It sounded like 2 elephants crashing through the woods. They ran towards each other and melted into the night. We never saw tracks or got eyes on anything. Next year, November 2022, same exact place. We were up at 9 p.m.-ish. Brought along 2 extra people this time, and we were observing planes watching the sky. We all of a sudden saw an oddly flickering light flying from northwest to southeast. Right at about that time, I pointed it out that we all turned our eyes to it. Every single light switched off. We stared in the direction, kept our eyes on the path where it was going, and never saw anything else. Around 4 a.m., I heard a very long, drawn-out yell that sounded very similar to the Ohio howl. It was pretty far away and echoed down through the valley. We started going to the area because my buddy and I went in 2021 and had a very close yell-howl event in the same area. Lastly, the person that wrote in stating he saw Indians in ceremonial dress that later disappeared reminded me of a story that my mom and uncles witnessed in the 1950s in Marietta, Texas. They were out walking to a relative's house and rounded a corner when they almost walked into a Native American man. I've inquired about the story to multiple people, and they all match. Grown Native man, hair braided in 2 ponytails, war paint, some sort of cloth covering the private parts. Dark eyes with no shirt or clothing. My uncle was holding the light and spoke. Basically said hi and asked what his name was and what he was doing in the area. He said the lantern reflected off the skin of the man. He said the man just looked at them with piercing eyes and never moved or spoke. After a few seconds, they said all of them, 6 or 7 kids if I remember correctly, felt the temperature fall suddenly, and they all felt terror at the same time. They said they all ran back to the home instantly without looking back. They ran home and told my grandmother, and she stated that she used to see them when she was little. Her family members said that they were Indian spirits. She was born in 1918. I was told the story when I was pretty small, but I had never forgotten. The odd part about the story is my uncle still finds arrowheads occasionally in the front yard and around my grandmother's house, and I have handled them. Her house is very close to a cemetery, and there's some abnormally sized rocks in the area that I was seeing. It's interesting that there's a lot of Native American stories associated with seeing ghosts of older Native Americans. Harvey and I have been out doing research and been told similar stories in similar areas. There was a story that came out of Hoopa when we were there that a man was going by an area very desolate, and it was late at night, and there was somebody on the side of the road, pulled over, picked him up. Person got in, was dressed like a Native American, older times, in Indian garb. Nothing was said. He asked where he was going, and the person just pointed ahead. So they went about 4 or 5 miles, and they got to a gas station where there was some light. This is in the middle of the night. The individual got out of the truck, walked a few feet, and the person looked, and for feet, this thing had hooves. He said he was so scared he just drove away. And then he looked in the seat and there was no indentation, there was nothing. There was never a sound made by this person. He was just trying to be a nice guy by picking up this hitchhiker. Pretty weird story. Now I want to flash on over and start talking about missing 411, a sobering coincidence. There's a lot of stories that come out of Manchester, UK, about young men that went to bars at night and then disappeared after they went to the bar, after they were with friends. There was a lot of rumors this happened over many years, that people would disappear and they'd be found in the canals and channels. And a lot of these canals and channels were so shallow that you could have stood up in them. And these people were found, predominantly all men, dead from drowning in these canals. And again, what didn't make any sense was that they could have stood up. Cause of death was always drowning, which did make sense. And after several years, the Manchester police started to push an agenda that there was a possible serial killer of young men. Now there's thousands of towns around the world that have a port, a harbor, a location where they sit next to the water of a large body of water at a lake, at the ocean, on a river. There's thousands. But realistically, there's only a handful, maybe 15 of these locations where there's a tremendous number of men that have disappeared and are later found in water. Now, nobody ever sees these people when they enter the water. They don't have any idea how they got to the water. And half the time, they don't have an idea about how they even died. A lot of times, the coroner makes a determination of unknown cause of death. Now, the problem is, in a lot of these locations, there's a lot of people around. If there's a lot of people, somebody will see somebody jump in, somebody get pushed, a struggle, etc. And please understand, when somebody falls in the water and they don't know how to swim, they're going to be struggling for their life. They're going to be screaming for help. It's going to be a huge scene. You just don't fall in and sink and that's the end. You fight for your life. And I think a lot of people forget this. So in my book, I identified several locations in North America and around the world that had these very unusual water clusters. Almost always young, very healthy men would be out drinking with friends and relatives. And they'd say, I'm going to the bathroom. Or they'd say, hey, I'll be right back. Or I'm going to get another drink. And there's this point of separation. And sometimes, some point during that separation, the individual gets lost or is never seen again. Now, in a lot of these bars, to get to the water, you'd have to walk across snow. And there was never tracks through the snow to the water. And they'd bring in canines and, it goes on and on. They could never find a point-to-point track on any of these cases I wrote about. And then a lot of the cases, the individual who did disappear would be found, and they couldn't determine the cause of death. Now what happened is that there's been a rush on these cases. Nobody's talking about it. Very few people are. Let me read you some of these. Cleveland.com, February 21st this year. Body of Lakewood man is the fourth recovered from Lake Erie in a week. Fourth. Lakewood man's body was recovered from Lake Erie on Monday, according to police. The man, identified as Colin Brady, 24, was found at 7:30 a.m. floating in water. According to police, the office of the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner, the discovery was made by a resident living on the 1000 block of Erie Cliff Drive off the shore of Lake Erie. Lakewood police, firefighters, and officials of the medical examiner's office responded. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Police did not say if any suspicious activity was suspected. His body is the fourth recovered from the lake in a week. On February 13th, authorities found the bodies of two fishermen who went missing. On Saturday, an unidentified man's body was discovered ashore on Lakeshore Boulevard in Cleveland. Think about this for a second. That article will never be talked about again. Bodies in the water, forget it. Fishermen's bodies are regularly discounted as they fell overboard or their boat capsized, whatever. But not all the cases are like that. Next one, Chicago Sun-Times. Body pulled from Diversey Harbor, identified as missing Northwestern student Peter Salvino. Peter was reported missing Sunday, police said. The 25-year-old was a doctoral candidate at Northwestern University. Many of the cases I've written about, young men who are brilliant. Doctoral candidate. He was pulled from the Diversey Harbor on the north side on Tuesday, was identified as Salvino, a Northwestern University student. At 5:15 p.m., the remains of a male were found in the 2400 block of North Cannon Drive by members of the Marine Unit responding to a report of a missing person in the area. Salvino, a 25-year-old Northwest doctoral student, was reported missing Sunday after leaving a party on the 2400 block of North Geneva Terrace. His cell phone was last pinged to a location near Diversey Harbor. Salvino, a graduate research assistant in the laboratory of Dr. Lucas Pinto, according to a statement by the university. My heart goes out to Peter's family and his many friends, Pinto wrote in a statement. This is an incalculable loss. All of us who knew Peter know how effortlessly brilliant he was. See what I said? But what he will truly miss is his endless kindness, humbleness, and generosity with his time and intellect, and of course his understated dry humor. Exactly what we need more of in this world. He was universally loved by our team and will leave an indelible mark. My grief is immense, but it is not surpassed by my gratitude for getting to know him, work with him, and share his contagious enthusiasm for science. We'll really miss you, Peter, Pinto added. The university is offering free mental health support. That's what Peter looked like. My gosh. We can't be losing more of these people. We need to save them. What happened here, folks? This is exactly the scenario I'm talking about. Exactly. Point of separation, leaves the party alone. Nobody sees anyone fall in the water. Nobody says he went to go take a swim. How did he get in the water? Yeah. ABC News, Chicago, January 29th this year. Body of John Doe pulled from Lake, Michigan near Museum Campus, Chicago police say. The police are conducting a death investigation after the body of an unidentified man was pulled from Lake Michigan. John Doe was recovered from the water just after 11 a.m. in the 1100 block of South Lakeshore Drive near Museum Campus. The person has only been identified as an adult male. Detectives are investigating and are awaiting autopsy results. The person had a mother. Yeah. Who was it? Stasman stated. Polish man's cause of death revealed months after vanishing at Chicago's party. Body pulled from Lake Michigan. Yahoo News, March 15th this year. The cause of death has been released on a 21-year-old Polish man whose body was pulled from Lake Michigan last year after he vanished from a party at a Chicago bar. Krzysztof Zubert died by accidental drowning with ethanol intoxication listing as contributing factor. It's alcohol. Cited by the Cook County Medical Examiner. Zubert, 21, was pulled unresponsive from the lake at Oak Street Beach just before 2 a.m. on December 7th. Chicago police previously said he was rushed to Northwestern Hospital where he was pronounced dead. Police said Zubert appeared to have a laceration on the right side of his head, and they have launched an investigation into his death. Zubert vanished December 3rd after spending time with co-workers at the Howl at the Moon Bar on Chicago's River North neighborhood. He was last seen at 9:45 p.m. His friends were unable to contact him the following morning and returned to the River North neighborhood to retrace their steps and put up missing persons posters. Zubert, who was from Tiffin, Poland, had worked in information technology for NAP Incorporated, a global tech company. He had been in the U.S. since November, staying at a hotel while working on the project in Joliet. The 21-year-old was due to return to Poland in a week after his disappearance. Had to have been brilliant to be hired at 21 and brought to the U.S. over a project. This is the wanted poster on him. Again, point of separation, leaves the party. Suddenly, gone. Nobody sees him fall in the water. Nobody sees anything about how he got there. Nothing. There's just this identical circumstance. Boom, boom. And then everyone writes it off. Nobody has anything done to it. International Business Times, December 21st, 2022. Spike in bodies recovered from Chicago's Lake Michigan sparks fear among residents. The body found by CPD dive teams in Illinois Diversey Harbor, we talked about that earlier, was identified at Northwestern University doctoral student Peter Salvino by the Cook County Medical Examiner. His body was pulled from Lake Michigan days after he went missing. The cause of his death, however, will be determined following an autopsy. Peter Salvino's family issued a statement after the body's recovery, thanking the public for their assistance. We are both shattered and relieved to report that earlier today we found Peter during a marine search of the harbor. Throughout the last 3 days, we have been overwhelmed by the support. We are grateful beyond measure. It's been a devastating loss. I have no idea. Salvino's death not only shattered the community, but also created a sense of alertness among the public amid a spike in missing persons' bodies being pulled from the waters. Earlier this month, the body of a 21-year-old Polish man, Krzysztof Zubert, was pulled from Lake Michigan on Oak Street beach days after he went missing following a Christmas party. The cause and circumstances surrounding his death were being investigated by the Cook County Coroner's Office. Earlier this year, the bodies of Daniel Sotelo and his girlfriend Natalie Brookson, both former Illinois University students, were recovered weeks apart from the lake. The cause and circumstances around their death remain a mystery. In September, the body of a Highland Park resident, Matt Ascaridis, 45, was found in the shoreline of Lake Michigan with suspicious injuries. 2 men were charged in connection to his death. In March, authorities found transgender rights activist Elise Mallory's body in the lake, and the cause of death remained undetermined. That undetermined cause of death is very regular in these cases. Several bodies washed up on shore in April, but there were no indications of criminal activities, according to authorities. Several bodies washed up. There's no obvious criminal activity, so they must have just found water somehow. Close that case. You see how easily these cases are just overlooked? Despite the lack of hard evidence of foul play in these cases, including Salvino's, people believe there's a serial killer on the loose. Wow, you think so, Ollie? I'm convinced there's a serial killer loose in Chicago. You mean to tell me there's been several bodies discovered in Lake Michigan? If you're from Chicago, you know you won't go near that place this time of the year, a Twitter user wrote. There's a serial killer on the loose in Chicago killing men who visit River North bars and then dumping them in the Chicago River into Lake Michigan, another tweeted. Are we going to ignore the serial killer targeting men and disposing of their bodies in Lake Michigan? A third wrote. Understand something. This is very normal for a community to react this way. This is identical language to what was said in Manchester, UK. Similar language started on a series of missing men in Massachusetts, around Boston area. So when police start getting frustrated, they'll start making wild accusations. Now, do I think there is a serial killer? Yeah, but not in the conventional sense. It's different. But if you knew the number of cases I had just like that, read Missing 411, a sobering coincidence. Now, this first case, let's see if you can make some similar associations. It's about a man named W.T. Hoffman, 76 years old. Went missing November 24th, 1921 in Tacoma, Washington. He was a resident of Parkland, Washington. On the 24th, he traveled by boat with his wife, his son and daughter-in-law, and 2 friends from Parkland. And they picked up a boat in Tacoma and went to Seattle for the day, for an event. At the end of that day, they took the boat back, landed back in Tacoma at their harbor, disembarked, and the group walked on Pacific near 10th Street. And in a large crowd, they lost WT in that crowd at 10th and Pacific. Well, they went to the location where their own cars were parked, and he wasn't there. So they thought he got a ride home from somebody else. So they went home, and when they did, he wasn't there. They stated that he had never had any history of memory loss. He had no physical disabilities. He was in perfect shape. Well, the police were called at midnight when he didn't show up. Family said something's really wrong. He's a very reliable person. Well, the police canvassed that area around the harbor in Tacoma. And they didn't find any witnesses who had even seen WT. But it was just after midnight in Tacoma that first night the police were searching. The next day, family, friends, law enforcement, they gathered at the spot he was last seen at 10th and Pacific. And they started to spread out, looking for witnesses, looking if he may be in the area, looking for evidence of a crime. They found nothing. The next day, his son, who lived in Seattle, traveled down to Tacoma and helped in the search. And they had upwards of 50 people looking for him in that area. They searched the waterways, they searched the canals, they searched the streets, the alleys. They found nothing. He was described by his family that day as being in great spirits and in great health. After 3 weeks of searching, everyone sort of gave up. And they were absolutely mystified, and that was the word that the police used in their language when they were interviewed, were mystified by his disappearance. Fast forward 27 days from the day he went missing. December 21st, 1921. A fisherman named C.F. Ouse was on his boat. He looked over the side, and in the area of 15th and Harbor Street, he sees a body in the water, and he calls law enforcement. So this is a map of the Tacoma Harbor area. Now, WT and his wife and his family and friends were in this area on Pacific at 10th when they lost him in a crowd. His body is found down here in the water. Not that far of a distance. The area had been searched multiple times, and suddenly the body appears. Typical. Police were called, they come out, they recover the body. The coroner comes out and examines the body. And he said that the body had been in the water for several days. There were no bruises, lacerations, or any evidence of violence on the body. And there was paperwork on it indicating that it was WT. Nobody saw him go into the water. Nobody heard anyone calling for help. And the articles in the paper said, quote, "The police are at a loss to account for the pioneer's death." He was a pioneer in the area, and his family was. They could not state what the cause of death was. That is unusual, even for 1921. So a couple of questions. How did he get in the water? Why wasn't he ever seen? How come nobody saw him in that downtown area at all after the family didn't see him? Where did he go? How could they not account for his time? Why can't they find out the cause of death? And my friends, that is the perfect outline for a missing 411 sobering coincidence victim. Which is why I led you up to that point, to make you appreciate the story. There are very few places in the United States as a whole that have these. But the ones that do have many of them. Now, just north of Tacoma, up in Vancouver, British Columbia, and even down into Washington, they have these feet that have floated up onto the shore. And nobody can really say why it's only happening in Washington and British Columbia. Why isn't it happening at every port city? Nobody even wants to address that. Next case. A German man, Charles Schmidt. He was a farmer. He went missing November 29th, 1910. And he was hunting in an area called Pataha Creek, which is in the Blue Mountains of southern Washington. He was a deer hunter, and he was with some friends. He was described as a big, powerful man. Well, he was at a hunting camp with friends, and late in the afternoon he saw a buck off in the distance, and he told his buddies, "Hey, I'm going to go track this buck down." So he took off. Didn't come back that night. And the next morning his friends notify authorities and say, "Hey, we don't know what happened to our friend, but we need some assistance in the search." So the local sheriff responds, along with a contingent of others. 40 plus hunters and sheriffs responded for 6 days of searching. It was a phenomenal effort for a very rural area of Washington. And they found nothing, which was unusual because he's a big man. Well, on September 1st, 1911, this happened on November 24th, 1910, September 1st, 1911, a sheep herder is in the area where Charles disappeared. And they find, strangely, in the middle of nowhere near Pataha Creek, a handkerchief that is tied up about 4 or 5 feet off the ground on this tree limb. The sheepherder thought it unusual enough to grab it, and he knew somebody was missing in that area. So he gave it to law enforcement. Law enforcement took it to Charles's sister. She identified it as a handkerchief that she had given to him a year before he disappeared. So they went back in, and they ended up searching that area for another 4 days. They didn't find anything. Now, during my research on this disappearance, I gotta say, I found a series of events that were stunning, floored me, that were related to Charles Schmidt. And what the article said was, 12 months before Charles disappeared, His mother died suddenly and abruptly, is what it said. 2 years before Charles disappeared, his brother got kicked in the head by a horse and died 2 days later. 5 years before Charles disappeared, his uncle hung himself. 5 years and 4 months before this, Charles's nephew, who was 4 years old, fell into Pataha Creek and drowned. A year after the nephew's death, the boy's father left home and drowned himself in the same spot the boy died in Pataha Creek in 2 feet of water. And just 2 years ago, prior to this incident, a niece of Charles was caught under a rolling log and was crushed to death. I don't think I've ever heard of so much death associated in such a short period of time with somebody. I gotta say, that stunned me. Pataha Creek, Blue Mountains, Washington. I did look it up. I'll show you where it's at. This is the Idaho border, right here. This is the Pataha Creek area. The creek goes up into the mountains, and they were hunting the headwaters of it up on the northern end of the Blue Mountains. Now, this area down in Oregon you should all remember that, is that's the area in the first movie, Missing 411, where we chronicled a boy that disappeared and was later found 9 miles away over 2 mountain ranges, face down in the snow, barely alive. But alive. It's quite an unusual case, which is why we put it in our movie, our documentary, Missing 411. You can watch it on Amazon. So, those are the cases for today. Now, a lot of you don't even know that we have a Bigfoot website that is really comprehensive. And you can go to it at NA, like North America, nabigfootsearch.com. It's filled with all kinds of things. And that's also where our online store is at. And you can buy our books, Missing 411 books. Don't buy the books online. Buy them only from us. You're going to pay 3 or 4 times the value if you buy them through Amazon or eBay. Those are resellers ripping you off. And then you can also find Missing 411, A Sobering Coincidence, the book, on that website. And you can find DVDs and Blu Rays for our movies on that site. We should live in a strange world, folks. A very strange world. And the more I learn, the more I'm exposed to, the more stories I hear, the stranger life becomes. I was listening to a story the other day about a physician who was canoeing, got caught on an undercurrent, and essentially died. She was brought back to life. But the story was what she felt and what she observed or remembers observing while she was underwater. And the real question is, when your heart stops, does that mean you're dead? Is that the definition of death? Or is it when your brain stops functioning? Well, a lot of conjecture there. But when your heart stops, is that when these people have these visions or revelations about seeing a bright light, about seeing something happening to them? And if that is true, and you hear it time after time from people, is that proof of an afterlife? And I know there's going to be some people that dig their heels in and say, well, of course, Dave, there's an afterlife. And I'm with you on that. I believe that. But then there's also people that don't believe that at all. I actually feel sorry for those people. Because to think that life is so simple. We die, we're gone, that's it. We don't have a soul. That's another part of life that I probably never thought through when I was young, but as I've gotten older, I have. The idea that we have a soul, I think is pretty obvious. But then the better question is, what on earth that is alive doesn't have a soul? Does a cockroach? Does an ant? Do they have souls? And what's the delineating factor between what has a soul and what doesn't have a soul? Some of those life issues that always make me think. But please share this with your friends and neighbors. It helps me greatly if you do share. And know that we put up twice a week missing person videos. We just finished with 20 weeks of a Bigfoot 101 class. And then every week we have a news segment on our channel. Just the news, just the facts. Guarantee you'll learn something each time you watch the news. But anyway, thanks again. I'm going to go out and give Huck some belly rubs. She said to say hello. Oh, and you do know she is the executive producer, so she is the boss. Be safe. Be kind. Do something friendly to someone you see in the street, someone you see at the store. We need more kindness. Paulides out.